The road wasn't meant for running. The mare beneath her had gone lame 2 miles back, but Clara Wynne kept riding. Every jarring step sent pain shooting through her ribs where she'd fallen against the rocks during a last night's storm. But stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering why she was running in the first place. Dust Hollow appeared through the October haze like a mirage, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the Wyoming wind. The kind of town that asked few questions and remembered even less. Perfect for a woman with bruises that weren't all from falling off her horse. Clara's hands trembled as she guided the limping mare down the main street. Her wedding dress, or what would have been her wedding dress, lay somewhere in a creek bed 50 miles back. Traded to a traveling merchant's wife for men's trousers and a worn coat that smelled of tobacco and honest work. The woman hadn't asked why a lady needed such things. Maybe she'd seen that look before in other women's eyes. The boarding house squatted at the edge of town like a tired dog. Its painted sign so faded that Clara could barely make out Mrs. Holloway's respectable lodgings. Respectable? She almost laughed, but her throat was too dry from the road dust that clung to everything in these parts. Inside, the proprietress looked up from her ledger with sharp eyes that had catalogued 1,000 secrets. Mrs. Holloway was the kind of woman who'd been old since she was 30. Gray hair pulled severe, hands that had done every kind of work, and a face that gave away nothing. "Room for the night." Clara's voice came out rougher than intended. "Week's payment in advance." Mrs. Holloway's pen never stopped moving. "No visitors after 9, no liquor, no trouble." Clara placed the last of her money on the scarred wooden counter. It was her mother's emergency fund. Sewn into the lining of her traveling case, the one thing she'd managed to grab before climbing out that window. Her mother, who'd arranged the marriage to Mr. Thornberry. Her mother, who'd said a 40-year-old railroad man was a good match for a girl of 19. Her mother, who'd never asked if Clara wanted to spend her life in a mansion built on other men's sweat. "Trouble's the last thing I'm looking for," Clara said. Something in her voice made Mrs. Holloway look up properly. The older woman's gaze traveled from Clara's mud-caked boots to her tangled hair, taking in the way she held her left arm against her body, the purple shadow blooming along her jaw that no amount of trail dust could hide. "Room's at the top of the stairs, last door on the right, pumps out back for washing, supper's at 6. Mrs. Holloway pushed a key across the counter. "Dr. Henshaw makes rounds on Tuesdays if you need tending." "I don't need—" "Wasn't asking what you need, girl, just telling you what's available." Clara took the key with her good hand. The metal was warm, worn smooth by countless other fingers. How many other women had held this same key, running from marriages or to them, from fathers or lovers or their own foolish choices? The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the stable yard. Clara sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she'd done. By now, they'd have found her room empty. Her mother would be in hysterics. Mr. Thornberry would be furious his reputation couldn't afford a runaway bride. They'd send men after her. But she'd been careful to leave false trails, buying 3 different stage tickets and taking none of them. Outside her window, the late afternoon sun painted Dust Hollow in shades of amber and rust. The town was coming alive with the evening shift cowboys heading to the saloon, shopkeepers closing up, women hurrying home before the respectable hours ended. The air carried the scent of coming winter, sage and wood smoke and something else freedom, maybe, though it smelled surprisingly like fear. Clara unpacked her few belongings. A change of clothes, her father's pocket watch, the one thing of his she'd managed to save before her mother remarried. A small photograph of her sister Emma, who'd died of fever 2 summers past. Emma, who'd whispered on her deathbed that Clara should run if she ever got the chance. "I ran, Em," Clara whispered to the photograph. "Just like you said." A knock at her door made her heart slam against her ribs. But it was only a girl, maybe 14, with dinner on a tray. "Mrs. Holloway says you missed supper in the dining room. The girl set the tray on the washstand. She says to tell you that eating alone upstairs don't cost extra first night. After the girl left, Clara picked at the stew and cornbread. It was simple fare, but good. Better than anything she'd eaten on the trail. Through her window, she could see men moving in the stable yard, tending to horses by lamplight. One of them, taller than the rest, worked with methodical precision. There was something about the way he moved unhurried, deliberate, that made her watch longer than she should have. When he turned toward the boarding house, the lamplight caught his face. Not handsome in the classical sense, his nose had been broken at least once, and his jaw held too much stubbornness. But there was a steadiness to him that made Clara step back from the window. She'd had enough of men and their intentions, steady or otherwise. The sounds of Dust Hollow at night filtered through the thin walls. Laughter from the saloon, a woman singing, her voice carrying on the wind, horses shifting in their stalls. Life going on as it always had in these frontier towns, indifferent to one more runaway seeking refuge. Clara lay down fully clothed, her body aching from the hard ride. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out how to survive with no money and no plan beyond staying hidden. Tonight, though, she was safe. No one knew her name here. No one cared where she'd come from or why. In the morning, she'd need to find work. Any work. She could sew well enough, or cook, or clean. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore, but that was tomorrow's worry. As sleep finally claimed her, Clara's last thought was of the road that had brought her here. Roads were meant for traveling between places, her father used to say. But sometimes, she thought drowsily, they were meant for leaving things behind, things like promises you never made and futures you never chose. Outside, Dust Hollow settled into its nighttime rhythms, and somewhere in the stable yard, a tall man finished his work and headed home, never knowing that the course of his quiet life was about to change. The first time he didn't ask. Clara woke to the sound of horses and morning cold that had crept through every crack in the boarding house walls. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the narrow bed, the unfamiliar quilt, the absence of her mother's sharp voice calling up the stairs. Then it all came rushing back, along with the ache in her ribs and the larger ache of having nowhere to go. She'd need to return the mare to the stable and somehow pay for its care. The poor creature had carried her faithfully despite the injured hoof. It was the least she could do, even if it meant spending money she didn't have. The stable yard was busy despite the early hour. Men moved between the stalls with practiced efficiency, their breath misting in the cold October air. Clara approached the main entrance, where a grizzled older man sat mending a bridle. "Help you, miss." "I have a mare. She came up lame yesterday. I was wondering about boarding fees and—" "That yours, the bay with the wrapped fetlock?" When Clara nodded, he shook his head. "Already taken care of. Found her this morning. Recognized Mrs. Holloway's brand on the saddle. Figured she belonged to a boarder." "I need to pay." "Talk to Elias about it. He's the one doctored her hoof." The man jerked his thumb toward the back of the stable. "Tall fellow. Can't miss him." Clara made her way through the dim interior, past stalls of dozing horses and the sweet smell of hay. She found him exactly where the old man had indicated, bent over a workbench, repairing what looked like a broken harness. He was indeed tall. She'd been right about that from her window view, with dark hair that needed cutting and hands that moved with surprising gentleness over the leather. "Excuse me." He looked up, and Clara found herself meeting the steadiest pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen. There was no surprise in them at finding a woman in men's clothing standing in his stable. No quick inventory of her face and figure like she was used to from other men. Just a patient, waiting look, as if he had all the time in the world. "You doctored my mare," she said. "Hoof was full of stone bruises. Cleaned it out, wrapped it. She'll be tender for a few days." His voice was low, roughened by weather or disuse. "Needs rest more than anything. What do I owe you?" He turned back to his work. "Nothing. Horse was hurt, needed tending. I don't take charity. Didn't offer any, just did what needed doing. Clara stood there, uncertain. Every interaction she'd had with men involved transaction her beauty for their attention, her compliance for their protection, her future for their money. This man, who hadn't even offered his name, seemed to want nothing from her at all. She's a good horse, he said after a moment, still focused on the harness. Loyal, kept going even when it hurt. Not many would do that. Something in the way he said it made Clara wonder if he was talking about more than just the mare. She saved my life, she found herself saying. Then I'm glad I could help her. He set down the harness and finally looked at her properly. Elias Brannock, I run the freight business out of here, but I help with the horses when needed. Clara. She didn't offer her last name, and he didn't ask for it. Your saddle's in the tack room. Clean the mud off it. There's coffee on the stove in the office if you're cold. It was a dismissal of sorts, but a kind one. Clara hesitated, then asked, Do you know who might be hiring I need work? For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly, but a kind of recognition. Mrs. Chen runs the laundry on 2nd Street. Her girl just got married, moved to Denver. Might could use help. Thank you. He was already back to his work. Chore that needs doing. Coffee's getting cold. Clara found the office a small room barely warmer than outside, with a pot-bellied stove and a coffee pot that had seen better days. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot, and she wrapped her hands around the tin cup gratefully. Through the small window, she could see Elias moving between the horses, checking hooves, adjusting blankets. He had a way with them. She noticed. They turned toward him, not away. She'd known men who prided themselves on breaking horses, on showing them who was master. Her almost husband, Mr. Thornberry, had been one of them, boasting about the stallions he'd broken to saddle. But this man seemed to work with the animals, not against them. It was different. You planning to stare all morning or help with something? Clara jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. A woman stood in the doorway, sturdy, middle-aged, with calloused hands and a no-nonsense expression that reminded Clara of her old governess. I'm sorry, I was just drinking Elias's terrible coffee and wool gathering. I can see that. The woman's expression softened slightly. I'm Martha Brannock. Elias is my nephew. And you're the girl from the boarding house with the lame horse. How did you... Honey, there's exactly 3 things that travel fast in Dust Hollow gossip. Wildfire and bad news. Pretty girl shows up alone, looking like she's been rode hard and put up wet. That's at least 2 of the 3. Martha poured herself coffee with the ease of long practice. Don't worry, I'm not one to pry. Lord knows we've all got stories we'd rather not tell. Clara didn't know what to say to that kindness, so she said nothing. Elias mentioned you're looking for work. Mrs. Chen's a fair woman, but the laundry's hard labor. You sure you're up for it? I'm up for whatever pays. Martha studied her over the rim of her cup. That's what they all say, until their hands are cracked bloody from the lie. But you've got a look about you. Like that mare of yours, still going even when it hurts. Your nephew said something similar. Did he now? Martha's expression turned speculative. That's more words than he usually strings together for strangers. Must be something about you. Before Clara could respond, Elias appeared in the doorway. Mare needs grain. Should I put it on the boarding house account? I'll pay for it, Clara said quickly. With what? Martha asked bluntly. Girl, it's written all over you that you're running on fumes and prayer. Let the man feed your horse. You can settle up when you're settled. I don't... Take charity. Yes, we heard. Martha waved a dismissive hand. It's not charity when you pay it back. It's what folks do for each other out here. Today you need help. Tomorrow maybe Elias needs someone who can write a letter or figure accounts or any other thing you might be good at. That's how it works. Elias had already disappeared again. The matter apparently settled in his mind. Clara felt off balance, like the world had tilted slightly. In her experience, help always came with strings attached, visible or not. But these people, this taciturn man and his forthright aunt, seemed to operate by different rules.
"I should go," Clara said. "Thank Mrs. Chen about the job."
2nd Street, green door with the painted dragon. Martha confirmed. "Tell her I sent you. And girl, that bruise on your jaw is telling a story you might not want told. Sarah Henshaw sells good face powder at the general store. Might be worth the investment." Clara's hand went involuntarily to her jaw. She had forgotten about the bruise in her worry about everything else. "Thank you." She was almost to the door when Elias reappeared, carrying her saddle. "Needs new stitching on the left stirrup. I can do it this evening if you want."
Yes, thank you."
She reached for the saddle, but he was already setting it on a rack by the door. "It'll be here when you need it." He met her eyes for just a moment. "Good luck with Mrs. Chen." Clara left the stable feeling oddly unmoored. She'd prepared herself for a world of transaction and negotiation, where everything had a price and everyone wanted something. Instead, she'd found a man who doctored horses because they needed it and fixed saddles because they were broken, who offered help with the same matter-of-fact manner he offered coffee, as if kindness was just another chore that needed doing. The morning sun was warming the street as she headed toward 2nd Street. Behind her, she could hear the stable coming fully alive, horses calling for breakfast, men shouting good-natured insults, the ring of hammer on anvil. Normal sounds of a normal day in a place where she was a stranger. But for the first time since climbing out her bedroom window, Clara didn't feel quite so alone. "Just so you know, I don't trust cowboys." Mrs. Chen had hired her on the spot, barely glancing up from the massive tub of steaming water where she stirred what looked like an entire hotel's worth of bedsheets. The pay was modest, the hours long, and Clara's hands were already raw after just 3 days. But it was honest work, and Mrs. Chen asked no questions beyond, "Can you work hard?" and "Can you start now?" The bruise on Clara's jaw had faded to yellow-green, mostly hidden now by the powder Martha had been right to recommend. Her ribs still ached when she lifted the heavy baskets of wet laundry, but that pain was fading too. What wasn't fading was the peculiar feeling that settled over her every evening when she returned to collect her mare. Elias was always there, though he made no particular effort to speak to her. He'd fixed her stirrup as promised, refusing payment. He'd mentioned that the mare whom Clara had started calling Sage was improving nicely. Sometimes she found fresh water already in the bucket, or an extra ration of oats in the feed bin. Small kindnesses that asked for nothing in return. It was unsettling. On her 4th evening in Dust Hollow, Clara found him sitting on a crate outside the stable, working on what appeared to be a ledger by lamplight. The autumn dusk came early now, painting the sky purple and gold. "Don't you have a home to go to?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. He looked up from his figures, that steady gaze finding hers. "I do." "Then why are you always here?" "Work needs doing." He turned back to his ledger. "Freight shipment coming in tomorrow, making sure I've got the space." Clara should have collected Sage and left. Instead, she found herself saying, "Just so you know, I don't trust cowboys." His pencil paused. "All right. Men who think they can take whatever they want just because they can ride a horse and shoot a gun. Who treat women like property to be claimed. Sounds like you've met some poor examples. Is there any other kind?" He set down his pencil and looked at her properly. "I suppose that depends on what you're looking for." "I'm not looking for anything," Clara said quickly. "Especially not from men in wide hats who think they know everything about horses and nothing about basic decency." "Fair enough." He picked up his pencil again. "Though, for what it's worth, I don't own a wide hat. Never saw the point. Sun gets in your eyes either way." Despite herself, Clara felt her lips twitch. "That's your defense. Your hat's not wide enough." Not defending anything. You said you don't trust cowboys. That's your right. I'm just doing my books. She stood there for a moment, thrown by his calm acceptance. Every man she'd known would have argued, tried to prove her wrong, taken her distrust as a challenge to overcome. Elias just sat there, pencil scratching across paper, as if her opinion of cowboys was as unremarkable as the weather. "My mare," she said finally. She's in the third stall. Moved her closer to the front so you don't have to walk through the whole stable in the dark." Another small kindness, another debt she couldn't pay. "I can manage fine in the dark." "Never said you couldn't." He didn't look up from his ledger, just seemed practical. Clara went to collect Sage, who nickered softly at her approach. The mare's limp was nearly gone, and her eyes had lost that pained, glassy look from the trail. As Clara let her out, she noticed a small pile of apples by the stall door. "Those weren't there this morning," she said accusingly. "Wind must have blown them in," Elias replied without missing a beat. "From where the nearest apple tree is 50 miles away. Strong wind." She should have been annoyed by his transparent lie. Instead, she found herself fighting another smile. "I suppose next you'll tell me the grain that keeps appearing in her feed bin is just falling from the sky." Strange things happen in Wyoming territory. He finally looked up, and she caught what might have been amusement in those gray eyes. "Climate's unpredictable." Mr. Brannock." "Elias." "I can't keep accepting." "You're not accepting anything. Horse needs to eat. I've got grain. Simple as that." "Nothing's ever that simple." "Sometimes it is." He closed his ledger and stood, towering over her even at a respectful distance. "You want to pay me back? Help me load the freight wagons tomorrow. My regular man's laid up with a bad back. Could use someone who shows up on time and works hard." Clara considered this. "What's the pay?" "Same as I'd pay anyone else. $1.04 for a full day." It was fair more than fair. She could work for Mrs. Chen in the mornings, help with freight in the afternoon, build up enough money to what she still had no plan beyond surviving each day. "All right," she said. "Good. Be here at dawn." He gathered his ledger and lamp. "And Miss Clara, you don't have to trust cowboys, but you might consider trusting folks who are just trying to help." He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the deepening dusk with that unhurried walk she'd come to recognize. Clara stood there holding Sage's lead rope, wondering why she felt like she'd lost an argument they hadn't actually had. The boarding house was quiet when she returned. Most of the residents were in the dining room, but Clara had taken to eating in her room. Less chance of questions that way. Mrs. Holloway had stopped charging extra for the privacy after the first few days, another kindness Clara didn't know how to repay. She was brushing out her hair, thinking about tomorrow's work, when a commotion erupted in the street below. Men's voices, loud and slurred with drink. Clara moved to the window cautiously, keeping to the shadows. 3 cowboys, real ones this time, with those wide hats she'd mentioned to Elias, were hassling someone near the boarding house entrance. She couldn't see who until one of them moved, revealing the young girl who'd brought her dinner that first night. "Come on, sweetheart. Just one dance. We'll make it worth your while." Clara was moving before she'd made the decision, down the stairs and out the door. "Lucy, your mother's looking for you." She didn't know if the girl's name was Lucy or if she had a mother, but she put every ounce of authority she'd learned in her old life into her voice. The girl, bless her, was quick to understand. "Yes, miss, right away, miss." The cowboys turned their attention to Clara, and she immediately regretted her impulsiveness. She was no longer the protected daughter of a well-connected family. She was alone, and these men were very drunk. Well, looks like we found something even prettier." The lady said the girls wanted inside. Clara had never been so relieved to hear that low, steady voice. Elias stood a few feet away, having appeared as quietly as he disappeared earlier. He wasn't armed that she could see, wasn't making any threatening moves. He just stood there, solid and immovable as a mountain. "This ain't your business, freight man," one of the cowboys slurred. Just passing by, noticed the ladies seemed uncomfortable. "We're just being friendly." "Then be friendly somewhere else." There was something in the way he said it, not a threat exactly, but a statement of fact, like saying water was wet or winter was cold. The cowboys seemed to feel it too. After a moment of whiskey-fueled bravado, they decided there were better entertainments to be found at the saloon. After they'd gone, Elias looked at Clara. "You all right?" "I had it handled."
"Never said you didn't."
He touched the brim of his regular-sized hat.
"Evening, miss."
He was halfway down the street before Clara found her voice.
"Elias."
He turned. "Thank you. Just happened to be passing by." That almost smile again. "Climate's unpredictable in Wyoming. Remember?" This time, Clara did smile. "So I've heard. Apples falling from the sky. Cowboys appearing out of thin air." Strange place. Dust Hollow. He turned to go, then paused. "Dawn tomorrow. Don't be late." She watched him walk away. This man who didn't fit any of the categories she'd built for understanding the world. Not a cowboy, despite working with horses. Not a savior, despite stepping in to help. Just a man who did what needed doing and asked for nothing in return. Back in her room, Clara sat by the window and thought about trust. She'd told him she didn't trust cowboys, and that was true. But Elias Brannick wasn't really a cowboy, was he? He was something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. Outside, Dust Hollow settled into its nighttime routine, and for the first time since arriving, Clara found herself looking forward to tomorrow, not because it brought her further from her past, but because it was a day she'd chosen for herself. A day of honest work with a man who took her distrust in stride and offered kindness anyway. She still didn't trust cowboys, but maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to trust him, the cabin that didn't ask questions. 3 weeks had passed since Clara first helped Elias load freight wagons, and somehow it had become routine. Mornings at Mrs. Chen's laundry, afternoons at the stable, evenings finding small excuses to linger. Her hands had grown calloused but capable, her arms stronger from lifting heavy baskets and crates. The frightened girl who'd ridden into Dust Hollow on a lame horse was still there, but buried now under layers of honest work and careful distance. You keep frowning at that bridle, it's liable to fix itself out of pure fear. Clara looked up to find Martha Brannick watching her with that knowing expression she'd come to recognize. She'd been mending tack in the stable office while Elias dealt with a difficult customer outside some rancher who thought freight prices were negotiable if you yelled loud enough. "Just thinking," Clara said. Dangerous habit in a woman, or so I've been told. Martha settled herself on a crate with a grunt. "Course, the men who told me that generally weren't worth the powder to blow them up." Despite her mood, Clara smiled. Martha had that effect cutting through pretense like a sharp knife through butter. "Elias mentioned you're still at the boarding house?" Martha continued, her tone carefully casual. "Must be adding up, paying by the week like that." "It's manageable." Martha examined her fingernails. "Funny thing, Elias has been working on that old cabin behind his place. You know, the one his father built before the main house, been empty since the old man passed. He's been fixing it up for no reason anyone can see." Clara's hand stilled on the bridle. "That's nice. Waste of time, if you ask me. Who's going to live in it? Man barely uses the house he's got. Sleeps in the stable half the time when he's got freight coming in early." Martha stood, brushing off her skirts. "Still, he's always been peculiar about finishing what needs finishing. Says the roof's sound now, new chinking between the logs, even put in a proper stove, though Lord knows why." She left before Clara could respond, which was probably intentional. Martha Brannick never did anything by accident. That evening, Clara was preparing to leave when Elias appeared in the office doorway. He had that look that meant he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. "That cabin Martha mentioned." He began without preamble. "It's sitting empty. Seems foolish. You paying boarding house rates when there's a perfectly good place going to waste." Clara set down the harness she'd been holding.
Elias.
"Not charity," he said quickly. "Rent, same as you'd pay anywhere. Less than the boarding house. But that's just economics, it's not in town proper. You'd be doing me a favor. Really, empty buildings fall apart fast out here." People would talk.
People are already talking.
His expression didn't change. Young woman working at the laundry in the stable, staying at the boarding house but keeping to herself. They make up stories when they don't have facts. And me living in a cabin on your property won't give them more stories. Different stories, maybe. But you'd have a door you could lock and walls that don't share everybody else's business. He paused. And space to breathe. That last part got her. The boarding house. For all misses. Holloway's kindness was suffocating. Thin walls, curious eyes, the constant need to be invisible. The thought of a place of her own, even rented, was almost painful in its appeal.
"I'd need to see it first," she said.
"Fair enough." The cabin was a 10-minute walk from the main stable, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods that were dropping their last golden leaves. It was small, one room with a sleeping alcove, but solidly built, true to Martha's report. The roof was new, the chinking fresh, and a small but efficient stove sat in the corner. The windows even had glass, a luxury in these parts. "Previous tenant left some furniture," Elias said, indicating a table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame. "It's yours if you want it. If not, I can move it out." Clara walked the perimeter of the room, her footsteps echoing on the plank floor. Someone had swept recently, Elias. Probably. The windows looked out on the grove and, beyond that, the endless Wyoming sky. No neighbors to peer through curtains. No footsteps in the hallway at all hours. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what? Why do this for me? You don't know anything about me." Elias was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the dying light. "Know you work hard. Know you pay your debts. Know you treat horses with kindness even when you're hurting yourself." He turned to face her. "That's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be. We all came from somewhere else. Clara, what matters is who we choose to be now." She thought about that, about choosing who to be, for 19 years. Other people had made that choice for her. Be pretty, be obedient, be married to a railroad baron old enough to be her father. Now, in this simple cabin that asked no questions, she could choose for herself. "How much?" she asked. $1 a week, includes firewood." It was ridiculously low, and they both knew it, but it was still rent, still a transaction that let her keep her pride. "When can I move in?" "Whenever you're ready." That word again, ready. He seemed to use it a lot, as if he understood that readiness couldn't be rushed or forced. "Tomorrow," she decided. "I'll move in tomorrow." He nodded. "I'll have the wood box filled. There's a well out back. Pump works fine. And Clara," he paused at the door. "The lock's solid. You'll have the only key." After he left, Clara stood in what would be her new home and felt something she hadn't experienced since Emma died possibility. Not the grand possibilities of her former life, with its parties and suitors and social climbing. Just the simple possibility of a quiet life lived on her own terms. She moved in the next day with her few possessions. Mrs. Holloway seemed unsurprised, merely nodding and returning what was left of Clara's deposit. "You need anything, you know where to find me," was all she said. The first night in the cabin, Clara sat at the small table and watched the stars through her window. She'd bought supplies from the general store: coffee, beans, flour, the basics using money she'd earned with her own labor. The silence was different here than at the boarding house. Not the tense silence of trying not to be noticed, but the peaceful quiet of chosen solitude. A knock at the door made her freeze. old fears rushing back. But it was only Martha, carrying a basket that smelled of fresh bread. "Housewarming," she announced, pushing past Clara without invitation. "Don't look at me like that. It's tradition. Plus, Elias mentioned you might not have had time to bake yet." The basket contained not just bread, but preserves, butter, and a small crock of stew still warm from Martha's stove. Clara's throat tightened at the kindness. "I should refuse this," she said. "Probably." Martha was already putting things away, familiarizing herself with the cabin's layout. "But you won't, because you're practical underneath all that pride, and because you know I'd be offended. And offending the only woman in town who'll tell you straight when you've got soap in your hair is poor strategy." Clara laughed, surprising herself. "Do I have soap in my hair?" "No, but you did yesterday. Elias noticed but was too polite to say anything. Men." Martha shook her head in mock despair. "Now, let me tell you about the stove. It's got a temperamental damper." She stayed for an hour, filling the cabin with chatter and advice. After she left, Clara realized the nervous knot in her stomach had loosened. The cabin no longer felt empty but inhabited, marked by friendly presence. Over the next week, Clara settled into her new life. The work was still hard. Her past still chased her in dreams, but for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she was building something instead of just running. The cabin became her sanctuary, a place where she could drop the careful mask she wore in town. Elias kept his distance, which she appreciated. He'd appear to check if she needed anything, always at reasonable hours, always knocking and waiting for permission to enter. Sometimes he'd bring small things, a better lamp he claimed was cluttering up his storage, a thick blanket because winter comes fast here, a set of curtains Martha had supposedly made too many of. Clara knew what he was doing, of course, but the fiction of it, the careful preservation of her independence, even as he made sure she had what she needed, touched her more than outright gifts would have. It was consideration of a kind she'd never experienced, from a man who seemed to want nothing in return except the knowledge that she was safe. The cabin didn't ask questions. Neither did Elias, and slowly, carefully, Clara began to believe that maybe she could build a life here after all. Not the life she'd run from, not the life others had planned for her, but something new and entirely her own. "I'm not ready." Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it the kind of cold that crept through even the best chinked walls. Clara had been in the cabin for 3 weeks now, and while she'd grown comfortable with its quirks, the stove that needed coaxing on damp mornings, the way the wind sang through the cottonwoods, she hadn't yet learned to sleep through the nightmares. They came without warning. Sometimes she was back in that house, her mother's shrill voice insisting that Mr. Thornberry was a good match, that she should be grateful. Sometimes she was in his parlor, his thick fingers reaching for her hand while he described the sons she would give him. But worst were the dreams where she was caught, dragged back, her escape nothing but a cruel fantasy. This night was one of the bad ones. She woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat despite the cold. The cabin walls felt too close, the darkness too complete. Clara wrapped herself in the thick blanket Elias had brought and stumbled outside, needing air, needing space, needing to remind herself that she was free. The night was clear and bitter cold. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled sugar. She sank onto the cabin's front step, pulling the blanket tighter, and tried to steady her breathing. The cottonwoods stood bare now, their skeletal branches reaching toward the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. She didn't hear him approach, she never did, but suddenly Elias was there, sitting on the other end of the step, far enough away to be proper, but close enough for comfort. He didn't speak, didn't ask why she was sitting outside in the middle of a freezing night. He just settled himself like he had all the time in the world, and pulled out a flask from his coat. "Tea," he said, offering it to her. "Martha's blend. Says it helps with sleep, though I suspect that's more hope than fact." Clara took the flask with shaking hands. The tea was still warm, with hints of chamomile and something else mint. Maybe it tasted like comfort.
Couldn't sleep either,
she asked after a while. Freight wagon with a broken axle? Been working on it. He glanced at her sideways.
Heard your door.
From anyone else? It might have sounded like prying. From Elias. It was just a statement of fact. He'd heard, so he'd come. Simple as that. They sat in silence for a long time, passing the flask back and forth. The cold was brutal, but somehow Clara couldn't bring herself to go back inside. The cabin, her sanctuary, felt tainted by the nightmare.
I dream about him sometimes,
she said suddenly. The words came out without her permission, dropping into the cold night air like stones into water. The man I was supposed to marry, he had expectations about what a wife should be, should do, should endure. Elias said nothing, but she felt him listening in that complete way he had. My mother thought I was being foolish, said all men had expectations, and at least he was rich, said I'd learn to accept it, that all women did. Clara's voice caught.
My sister Emma, before she died, she told me to run if I ever got the chance. Said some things weren't worth enduring, no matter how much money came with them.
Your sister sounds wise.
She was everything I'm not, brave and strong and sure of herself.
Clara wiped her eyes with the corner of the blanket.
I'm not any of those things. I'm scared all the time. Scared they'll find me. Scared I'll have to go back. Scared that maybe my mother was right and I'm just being foolish.
Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave, Elias said quietly. Brave is keeping going despite the fear. Is that what you think I'm doing, being brave? I think you're surviving. Sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do. Clara turned to look at him. In the starlight, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were kind. Why are you always so steady? Nothing seems to rattle you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Plenty rattles me. I just learned to sit still through it.
How?
He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my father was a hard man, thought the world owed him more than it gave, and took his disappointment out on whoever was closest, usually my mother, until she died. Then me. He shifted slightly, spent years flinching at shadows, jumping at raised voices. Then one day I realized I could choose not to, could choose to be still instead, to wait, to watch, to decide for myself when something was worth reacting to. But how do you know when it's worth it? Still figuring that out. He looked at her then, really looked at her. But I know sitting here is worth it, making sure you're all right. That's worth reacting to. Something shifted in Clara's chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't realized were there.
I'm not ready,
she whispered.
For any of this, for trusting, for hoping, for believing things could be different.
Then don't be ready. His voice was gentle. Just sit here. We'll wait until you are.
What if I'm never ready?
Then we'll sit here a long while. Good thing I'm patient. Clara laughed, a watery sound that was half sob.
You can't just sit here forever.
Watch me. And he would. She realized. This man who fixed broken things without being asked, who noticed when she needed help but never pushed, who offered tea on cold nights and company in the darkness, he would sit here as long as she needed. Not because he wanted something from her, but because she needed someone to sit with. The nightmares, she said. They make me feel like I never really escaped, like I'm still trapped there, in that life, in those expectations. You're here, Elias said simply, in Wyoming, sitting on your own front step of your own cabin that you pay for with your own work. That's real. The rest is just shadows.
Shadows can be scary too.
They can, but they can't hurt you unless you let them. He stood then, joints creaking from the cold. Come on, let's get you warm before you freeze solid. Martha would never forgive me. He offered his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. His hand was warm, calloused.
Careful. He released her as soon as she was steady, stepping back to a proper distance. Inside the cabin, he stirred up the fire in the stove while Clara sat at the table, still wrapped in her blanket. The familiar actions, the scrape of the poker, the smell of wood smoke. The gradual return of warmth began to chase away the nightmare's lingering chill. "I'll be all right now," she said. "I know." He headed for the door, then paused. "Clara, next time the shadows get too dark, you don't have to sit with them alone. My door's always open. Well, not literally, that would be foolish in winter, but you understand." After he left, Clara sat by the warming stove and thought about readiness. She'd told him she wasn't ready, and he'd accepted that without question, without trying to convince her otherwise. Just offered to wait with her until she was. She thought about her sister Emma, who'd told her to run when she got the chance. Emma, who'd known that some things were worth leaving behind, no matter how uncertain the future. Emma would have liked Elias, Clara thought, would have appreciated his quiet strength, his patient kindness. The nightmare didn't return that night. Instead, Clara dreamed of sitting on a step under starlight, sharing tea with someone who didn't need her to be anything other than what she was. Someone who understood that healing couldn't be rushed, that trust had to be built slowly, carefully, like a well-chinked cabin that could withstand the winter winds. She wasn't ready, not for trust, not for hope, not for whatever was growing between her and the steady man who fixed broken things. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop running, ready to sit still, to wait, to see what might grow in the patient silence between two people who understood that some things couldn't be forced. And if that was all she was ready for, well, Elias had said he was patient. She was beginning to believe him. Whispers in town. The first Sunday in December brought a fresh snowfall and the kind of gossip that spread faster than wildfire through dry grass. Clara noticed it at the general store when conversations stopped mid-sentence as she entered. She felt it at the laundry when Mrs. Chen's other workers suddenly found reasons to work in the back room whenever she was up front. "Don't pay them any mind," Mrs. Chen said, her hands never pausing in their efficient sorting of linens. Small towns, small minds. But Clara knew it was more than that. She'd been in Dust Hollow for nearly 2 months now, long enough for curiosity to ferment into speculation. A young woman, living alone, working at both the laundry and the freight stable, living in a cabin on Elias Brannick's property. The arithmetic was simple enough for anyone who wanted to do it. The breaking point came on Tuesday when Reverend Nathaniel Hartley's wife appeared at the laundry. Mrs. Hartley was a thin woman with a face that seemed permanently pinched, as if she'd bitten into something sour years ago and never quite recovered. "Miss Wynne, is it?" Mrs. Hartley's tone suggested she doubted even that basic fact. "Yes, ma'am." Clara kept her voice neutral, her hands steady on the shirt she was pressing. "I wonder if you might join me for tea this afternoon, at the parsonage. Say, 3 o'clock. It wasn't a request. Clara recognized the tone. She'd heard it often enough from her mother when propriety was about to be enforced like a bridle on a wild horse. "I work until 5, ma'am." "I'm certain Mrs. Chen can spare you for an hour, for such an important conversation." Mrs. Chen, who had been listening from her position at the washtubs, spoke up. "Clara works her full hours. That's our arrangement." "Mrs. Hartley's mouth tightened further. "I see. Then perhaps after work." "After work, she's tired," Mrs. Chen said flatly. "Whatever you need to say, you can say here." The two women locked eyes for a moment, and Clara was reminded that Mrs. Chen had been in Dust Hollow longer than most, had built her business when the town was nothing but tents and dreams. She didn't bend easily. Mrs. Hartley turned back to Clara. "Very well, I'll speak plainly. There are concerns about your living arrangements. A young woman, unchaperoned, residing on the property of an unmarried man. Surely you can see how that appears." "I pay rent," Clara said quietly. I work for my living. I don't see how that concerns anyone but me. My dear girl, everything in a community concerns everyone. Your situation reflects on all of us. There are young ladies in this town who look to their elders for examples of proper behavior. Then they should look to you, ma'am. I'm sure you're a fine example. It wasn't quite insolence, but it was close. Mrs. Hartley's face flushed. I'm trying to help you. Miss Wynne, there are standards, expectations. Expectations. Clara set down the iron carefully, very carefully. Yes, I'm familiar with those. Something in her tone must have warned Mrs. Hartley, because she took a small step back. I only meant... I know what you meant. Clara turned to face her fully. You meant that a woman alone must be either pitied or suspected, that kindness from a man must come with conditions, that I should care more about appearances than survival. I understand perfectly. Clara, Mrs. Chen warned softly. But Clara was tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that gossip didn't cut like winter wind. I'm sorry if my existence offends you, Mrs. Hartley, but I won't apologize for working honest work and living in honest shelter. If that's not proper enough for Dust Hollow, then perhaps Dust Hollow needs to examine its own standards. Mrs. Hartley left in a flutter of offended dignity. Clara stood there shaking, waiting for Mrs. Chen to tell her she was fired, that she couldn't afford to lose the church's business. Instead, Mrs. Chen handed her a cup of tea. Drink, you look ready to fall over. I shouldn't have... Probably not. But that woman's been needing telling off for years. Her washing always comes in stained with judgment. Mrs. Chen's mouth quirked. Still, might be you should watch yourself for a while. Wounded pride has a long memory. The whispers grew louder over the next few days. Women pulled their children closer when Clara passed. Men's gazes lingered with speculation rather than appreciation. Even at the stable. She noticed the freight drivers giving her odd looks, though none dared say anything with Elias nearby. By Friday, Clara was exhausted from the weight of constant scrutiny. She was cleaning tack in the stable office, trying to lose herself in the familiar work, when Martha burst in. Of all the pig-headed, sanctimonious, butter-wouldn't-melt nonsense. She slammed the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Martha, that Hartley woman. Do you know what she's done? She's convinced half the church board that you're a bad influence. Says young women might get ideas about independent living. Martha paced the small office like a caged cat. Ideas as if thinking for themselves is a disease that might spread. Clara's heart sank. I never meant to cause trouble for you or Elias. Oh, honey, no. Martha stopped pacing, her expression softening. This isn't trouble. This is just small people trying to make themselves feel bigger. Question is, what do you want to do about it? What can I do? I can't change what people think. No, but you can decide if you care. Martha sat down across from her. Look, I've lived in this town for 20 years, seen gossip destroy good people and bad people alike. But I've also seen folks stand their ground and wait it out. Truth is like cream, it rises to the top eventually. And if it doesn't, then you decide if this place is worth fighting for. That evening, Clara found Elias closing up the stable earlier than usual. He looked tired, she realized. More tired than freight work should make a man. People been giving you trouble? She asked. He glanced at her, then went back to checking the locks. Nothing I can't handle. That's not what I asked. He sighed, turning to face her. Tom Morrison pulled his freight contract today. Says he can't do business with someone of questionable moral character. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Elias, I'm so sorry. I never meant this is my fault. I should leave. You should do exactly what you want to do. His voice was firm. Tom Morrison's a fool who cheats on his weights anyway. I'm better off without his business. But if others follow, then they follow. He stepped closer, still maintaining proper distance, but somehow making the space between them feel smaller. Clara, I knew what people would say when I offered you that cabin. I'm not a fool. But I also knew what it was like to need a place to breathe, to be yourself without someone else's boot on your neck. If I lose some business for that, so be it. There are things worth more than money. Clara blinked hard against the burning in her eyes. I don't understand you. What's to understand? Why you keep helping me when it costs you so much? He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the falling snow. My mother used to say that the measure of a person wasn't in how they treated their equals, but in how they treated those who needed help. I'm not saying you need help, he added quickly. You're doing fine on your own, but when I saw you that first day, looking like the world had chewed you up and spit you out, I thought here's someone who could use a little kindness, the same kind someone showed me once, when I needed it. Who? Martha, after my father died and I was trying to run this place at 17, angry at the world and making a mess of everything. She showed up one day, told me I was doing it all wrong, and proceeded to teach me everything from bookkeeping to basic human decency. Never asked for anything in return, just said someday I'd find someone else who needed what I could offer. Clara thought about that about kindness passed from one person to another like a candle flame, lighting new wicks without diminishing its own light. And you think I'm that someone? I think you're someone. He met her eyes then. That's enough. They stood there in the gathering dusk, snow falling soft around them, the weight of the town's judgment pressing down but somehow feeling lighter shared between them. Clara thought about Mrs. Hartley's pinched face, about the whispers that followed her, about the price of independence in a world that preferred its women dependent. I won't leave, she said finally, not because of gossip. Good. A smile ghosted across his face. Would be a shame to fix up that cabin for nothing. Elias. Thank you for thinking I'm worth the trouble. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. But all he said was, You're worth a lot more than trouble. Clara Wynne. Someday I hope you'll see that too. He touched his hat and left her standing there in the snow, wondering how a man who said so little could somehow say exactly what she needed to hear. The town could whisper all it wanted. She'd faced worse than gossip and survived. And now, it seemed, she wasn't facing it alone. A fire in the mountains. The smell hit Clara first, acrid smoke carried on the wind that shouldn't have been blowing from the north. She was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she saw it, a dark plume rising from the direction of the mountain pastures where Elias kept his spare horses. Without thinking, she dropped the wet sheet and ran. The December snow had been light this year, leaving plenty of dry brush to feed a fire. By the time she reached the main stable, men were already gathering, their faces grim. Lightning strike last night, old Samuel was saying. Thought the snow would have dampened it, but must have smoldered in that dead pine. Elias was already mounted, his face set in hard lines. Sam, you and Robert take the water wagon. Follow the main road. Jake, Tom, you're with me. We need to get those horses out before... He broke off, seeing Clara. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, worry, maybe, or something deeper. How many horses, she asked. 6, including Sage. Clara's heart clenched. She'd moved Sage to the mountain pasture just last week, thinking the mare would enjoy the space after being confined. I'm coming with you. No. The word came out sharp. It's too dangerous. That's my horse up there. I'm coming. They stared at each other for a beat, and Clara saw him weighing her determination against his protective instincts. Finally, he jerked his head toward the stable. Take Buttercup. She knows the trails. The ride up was a nightmare of smoke and rising panic. The fire had spread faster than expected, feeding on drought-stressed pines and driven by mountain winds. Clara could hear the horses before she saw them high, frightened whinnies that cut through the roar of flames. The pasture was a box canyon, good for keeping horses contained but deadly when the only exit was blocked by fire. The 6 horses milled at the far end, eyes rolling white with terror. Sage stood slightly apart, favoring her old injury as she paced. "We'll have to drive them through the smoke." Elias shouted over the noise. "No other way! Jake, Tom, work the flanks! Clara!" But Clara was already moving. She'd grabbed a blanket from her saddle and dunked it in the stream that ran along the pasture's edge. The smoke was thickening, making her eyes stream, but she pressed forward. "Clara, get back!" She ignored him, moving toward Sage with the steady purpose she'd learned in these mountains. The mare was panicking, but she knew Clara's voice, Clara's scent. When Clara threw the wet blanket over Sage's head, covering her eyes, the horse stilled just enough. "That's my good girl," Clara murmured, grabbing the makeshift halter. "We're getting out of here." The other men had managed to bunch the remaining horses. Elias appeared at Clara's side, his own shirt soaked and wrapped around his mount's head. "On 3, we run for it. Stay low, hold tight, and whatever happens, don't let go." The dash through the smoke was the longest minute of Clara's life. Fire reached from both sides, the heat searing even through her thick coat. Sage wanted to bolt, to rear, but Clara held firm, her voice a constant stream of reassurance. She could hear Elias beside her, coughing harshly, still managing to keep his horse steady while helping drive the others. They burst through to clear air in a confusion of horses and men and blessed oxygen. Clara slid from Buttercup's back, her legs shaking, still holding Sage's lead. The mare was trembling but whole, her sides heaving. "Everyone accounted for." Elias's voice was rough from smoke. He was still mounted, and Clara saw why his left arm hung at an odd angle, his shirt torn and bloody. "Elias." "Just a branch. Caught me when thunder spooked." He tried to dismount one-handed and nearly fell. Jake and Tom rushed to help him. "I'll ride to town. Get Doc Henshaw." Jake said, "No need. I can—" Elias broke off, swaying. The blood was coming faster now. She could see whatever had caught him had done more than scratch. "Get him to my cabin," Clara ordered with authority she didn't know she possessed. "It's closest. Tom, ride for the doctor. Jake, help me get him down." The next hour blurred together. Somehow they got Elias to the cabin, got him on her bed despite his protests. The wound was ugly, a deep gash from shoulder to elbow where a burning branch had raked him. Clara had seen enough farm injuries to know it needed stitching, but the doctor was 30 minutes away at best. "There's whiskey in my saddlebag," Elias managed through gritted teeth. Clara found it, along with her sewing kit. Her hands shook as she threaded the needle. "This is going to hurt." "Already hurts." He tried to smile. "Least you've got steadier hands than Jake would." She cleaned the wound with whiskey, apologizing when he hissed in pain. The stitching was crude but functional. She'd mended enough things to know how to make edges meet. Through it all, Elias stayed conscious, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Talk to me," she said, partly to distract him, partly to keep herself steady. "Tell me about something. Anything." "My father," he said slowly, "used to say fire was like gossip. Spreads fast, destroys everything it touches, leaves scars even after it's out." Cheerful man. He had his moments, but he was right about the scars. His good hand found hers, gripped tight as she worked. "Clara, if something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen. You're too stubborn to die from one little scratch." "Big scratch." His voice was fading. "Want you to know, the cabin's yours. Papers are in my desk. Already signed them." "Elias, stop. You're going to be fine." "Maybe, but want you to know anyway. You deserve a place that's yours. No conditions." The fever started before Doc Henshaw arrived. By nightfall, Elias was burning up despite the cold compresses Clara applied. The doctor confirmed her stitching was good, but infection had set in fast, not uncommon with burns and torn flesh mixed. He needs careful nursing. Doc Henshaw said, someone will need to stay with him. Keep the fever down. Make sure he drinks when he's lucid. I'll do it, Clara said immediately. Miss Wynne, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I don't care about appropriate. She met the doctor's eyes squarely. He saved my horse. He saved all of us up there. I'm not leaving him. Martha arrived as the doctor was leaving, took one look at the situation, and started issuing orders. Jake, ride to the Brannock place and get clean clothes for him. Tom, let folks know Elias is being cared for but not receiving visitors. And someone needs to check on those horses. For 3 days, Clara barely left Elias's side. The fever raged, bringing delirium with it. He talked to his dead parents, argued with invisible freight customers, called for horses that weren't there. But sometimes he was lucid, and in those moments his eyes would find Clara's face with something like wonder. Still here, he'd murmur. Still here, she'd confirm, spooning broth between his cracked lips. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Clara was dozing in the chair beside the bed when she felt a touch on her hand. Elias was awake, truly awake, his eyes clear for the first time in days. You look terrible, he said softly. She laughed, a sound caught between relief and exhaustion. You're one to talk. The horses. All safe. Sage is in your barn, complaining loudly about the accommodations, but otherwise fine. Good. He studied her face. You stayed. Of course I stayed. Not of course. You don't owe me anything. Clara, never have. She thought about that, about owing and choosing, about the difference between obligation and care. I know, she said finally. That's why I stayed. He closed his eyes, but his hand found hers again. I'm glad you're here. So am I. And she was. She realized, despite the terror of the fire, despite the long days of nursing, despite the impropriety that would have misses, Hartley and Fitz, she was glad. This man had risked his life for horses, for property, for the livelihood of others. He'd done it without hesitation, without thought for what he might gain or lose, just because it needed doing. Rest now, she told him. I'll be here when you wake up. Promise. I promise. He slept then, real sleep instead of fevered unconsciousness. Clara kept watch as she had for 3 days, but now it was different. She wasn't just nursing a patient or repaying a debt. She was choosing to stay, choosing to care, choosing to let herself feel something she'd thought burned out of her. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the scars of fire with gentle white, and inside the small cabin, 2 people began the slow process of healing not just from physical wounds, but from the deeper injuries that only patience and tenderness could mend. People don't need to understand what's not theirs. 2 weeks had passed since the fire, and Elias was finally well enough to return to his own home, though Martha insisted he take things easy. Clara had returned to her routines, the laundry, the stable work, but nothing felt quite the same. The town's whispers had taken on a different tone after the fire. Some spoke with grudging respect about the woman who'd ridden into danger for her horse. Others muttered darker things about a woman who'd spent 3 days alone with a man in her cabin. Propriety be damned. Clara tried to ignore it all, but it came to a head on Saturday when she went to Gibson's general store for supplies. The store was busier than usual, filled with ranchers' wives doing their weekly shopping. Conversations dimmed when she entered, but she kept her head high and moved to the counter. Morning, Mr. Gibson. I need flour, coffee, and Clara Wynne. She turned to find Mrs. Morrison, wife of the freight contractor who'd pulled his business from Elias. The woman stood with 2 other merchants' wives, their faces set in expressions of righteous disapproval. Mrs. Morrison, Clara acknowledged coolly. We've been discussing your situation. Mrs. Morrison's voice carried through the store. It's become clear that Mr. Brannock isn't the type of man who can properly care for a young woman's reputation. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I wasn't aware, Mr. Brannock had any responsibility for my reputation. Oh, my dear. The condescension in the woman's voice could have curdled milk. When a man allows a woman to live on his property, when he puts her in compromising positions, when he lacks the strength to maintain proper boundaries, well, it reflects on both parties. Doesn't it? The only thing that reflects on Mr. Brannock, Clara said quietly, is that he's kind enough to rent a cabin to someone who needed it and brave enough to risk his life saving livestock from a fire. Brave, Mrs. Morrison laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. A truly brave man would have married you by now, made an honest woman of you instead of leaving you in this limbo. The store had gone completely silent. Clara could feel every eye on her, waiting to see if she'd crumble or explode. She did neither. An honest woman, Clara repeated slowly. Tell me, Mrs. Morrison, what's dishonest about working for my wages? What's dishonest about paying my rent, helping my neighbors, minding my own business, or is honesty only for women who trade their freedom for a ring and a man's name? Mrs. Morrison's face flushed. You're twisting my words. No, I'm understanding them perfectly. Clara turned to face the woman fully. You think Mr. Brannock isn't man enough because he respects my choices instead of making them for me. You think I'm not woman enough because I'd rather work than wed. But here's what I think people don't need to understand what's not theirs to understand. You insolent. I think, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength, that Mr. Brannock is more of a man than those who need to control women to feel powerful. And I think I'm exactly the kind of woman I choose to be, regardless of whether this town approves. She turned back to Mr. Gibson, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. My flour and coffee, please, and a pound of sugar. I'm thinking of making a cake. The tension in the store was thick enough to cut, but Clara stood calmly as Mr. Gibson filled her order with shaking hands. She paid, collected her goods, and walked to the door. Just before leaving, she paused. Oh, and Mrs. Morrison, that husband of yours who pulled his freight contract, Elias mentioned he's been overcharging customers for years. Skimming off the top. Might want to check your own house for honesty before you come checking mine. She left to stunned silence, her heart hammering but her steps steady. Outside, the December air was sharp and clean, washing away the suffocating atmosphere of the store. Clara had made it halfway down the street when she heard footsteps behind her. That was quite a performance. She turned to find Martha Brannock, a basket over her arm and approval written across her weathered face. Martha, Don't you apologize. That Morrison woman's been needing a set-down for years. Her husband's a cheat and everybody knows it, but she prances around like she's the queen of propriety. Martha fell into step beside her. Though you might have just painted a target on your back. It's been there since I arrived. Might as well give them a real reason to aim. Martha chuckled. You've got spine. Girl, I'll give you that. Question is, what are you going to do now? Clara thought about it as they walked. Same thing I've been doing. Work, live, make my own choices. They can gossip all they want. And Elias. What about him? Martha gave her a knowing look. Don't play dense. Half the town thinks you're his kept woman. The other half thinks you're a fool for not securing his ring. What do you think? Clara was quiet for a long moment, remembering those fevered days by his bedside, the way he'd held her hand through his pain, the simple acceptance in his eyes when he looked at her. I think Elias is the first man I've ever met who sees me as a person, not a possession or a problem to solve. I think he's patient and kind and asks nothing of me but what I'm willing to give. She met Martha's eyes. And I think that's worth more than all the gossip in Wyoming. Martha nodded slowly. You planning to tell him that? Tell him that I appreciate his kindness. He knows that. Child, for someone so smart about standing up to busybodies, You're being mighty thick about matters of the heart." Before Clara could respond, they'd reached the stable. Elias was there, his left arm still in a sling but otherwise looking stronger. He was directing Jake in loading freight, but his eyes found Clara immediately. "Heard there was some excitement at Gibson's," he said carefully. News did travel fast in Dust Hollow. Just a difference of opinion on the nature of honesty. "Ah," his mouth quirked. "And did honesty win?" "I think it might have, though Mrs. Morrison probably disagrees." "Mrs. Morrison disagrees with Sunrise on principle." He studied her face. "You all right?" "I'm fine." And she was. She realized. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt truly fine. Not safe safety was an illusion. Not comfortable comfort was a luxury. But fine. In the way of someone who'd finally found their footing on uncertain ground. "Good." He hesitated, then added, "Clara, about what people are saying." "People are always saying something. Today it's about us. Tomorrow it'll be about someone else." She shifted her parcels. "I should get these home. Oh, and Elias, I meant what I said in the store. Every word." She left him standing there, but not before she caught the expression on his face, surprise mixed with something warmer, deeper. Martha's cackle followed her down the street. That evening, Clara was making the cake she'd mentioned partly out of defiance, partly because she needed something to do with her hands when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Elias, his good arm holding a small wrapped package. "Heard you were baking," he said. "Thought you might need this." Inside was a small jar of vanilla extract, the real kind that cost a fortune this far from anywhere. Clara stared at it, then at him. "How did you—" "Been saving it for something special. Figured a cake baked in defiance of gossip qualified." He paused on her doorstep, clearly wrestling with something. "Clara, I need to say something." "Come in, it's cold." He stepped inside but stayed near the door. "What you said today, about me respecting your choices, that matters to me. Want you to know that won't change. No matter what this town says or thinks, your choices are yours to make." "I know." She set down the vanilla, moved closer to him. "That's why I trust you." Something shifted in his eyes. "You trust me? Don't look so surprised. You've earned it." She smiled. "Though I still don't trust cowboys in general. You're an exception." "I'll take it." He moved toward the door, then turned back. "Save me a piece of that cake." "Maybe, if you ask nicely." "Please." "I'll consider it." After he left, Clara returned to her baking with a lighter heart. Let the town talk. Let them whisper and judge and create stories from shadows. She'd spoken her truth in Gibson's store, claimed her right to live as she chose, and somehow, in standing up to their judgment, she'd found something she hadn't expected, not just defiance, but peace. The cake, when finished, was perfect. She cut 2 slices and wrapped one carefully. Tomorrow she'd take it to the stable, share it with a man who understood that the best kind of caring came without chains. Tonight, though, she'd sit in her cabin and savor the sweet taste of choosing her own life. The slowest dance. The Christmas dance at Reverend Hartley's house was the social event of the season in Dust Hollow. Even those who avoided church the rest of the year cleaned up and showed their faces, drawn by the promise of Martha Brannock's spiced cider and the chance to forget the harsh realities of frontier life for a few hours. Clara hadn't planned to attend, but Martha had appeared at the laundry that morning with a look that brooked no argument. "You're coming," she'd announced. "Already told Elias the same thing. High time this town saw you both hold your heads up instead of skulking around like you've got something to hide." "We're not skulking. You eat alone, work alone, barely speak to anyone but each other and me. That's skulking in my book." Martha's expression softened. "Besides, I made a dress for you. Been working on it since the fire. Call it a thank you for taking care of my nephew." The dress was simple but beautiful deep blue wool that brought out Clara's eyes. with careful stitching that spoke of hours of patient work. Clara had tried to refuse, but Martha wouldn't hear of it. Now, standing at the edge of the parsonage's main room, Clara wondered if coming had been a mistake. The space was warm with bodies and lamplight, filled with the sound of fiddle music and laughter. But conversation still stuttered when she passed, and she caught more than one pointed look from the town's matrons. "Punch!" She turned to find Dr. Henshaw holding 2 cups, his kind face creased in a smile. "Thank you. Don't let them bother you," he said quietly, nodding toward a cluster of whispering women. "Small minds need something to chew on. Next month, it'll be someone else's business." Before Clara could respond, the crowd shifted, and she saw Elias across the room. He was dressed in his best, which meant clean clothes without visible mending, and looked profoundly uncomfortable as Mrs. Gibson appeared to be lecturing him about something. His arm was out of the sling now, though he still moved it carefully. Their eyes met across the room, and something in his expression eased. He excused himself from Mrs. Gibson and made his way through the crowd, moving with the same deliberate purpose she'd seen him use with spooked horses. "You came," he said. "Martha didn't give me much choice. You." "Same." He looked around the festive room with barely concealed discomfort. "Not much for dancing, I'm afraid." "I haven't danced since—" Clara stopped. Since before her father died, before her mother's remarriage, before her life became about survival instead of joy. It's been a while. They stood together, not quite touching, but creating their own small space amid the crowd. Clara was acutely aware of him, the warmth he radiated, the way he held himself slightly between her and the rest of the room, protective without being possessive. The fiddle struck up a new tune, slower than before. Couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor, and Clara saw Mrs. Morrison watching them with sharp eyes, no doubt waiting to see what impropriety they might commit. "Would you," Elias started, then stopped. "That is, if you wanted—" "Are you asking me to dance?" "Trying to, not doing a very good job of it." Clara looked at him, this man who'd housed her without questions, who'd respected every boundary she'd set, who'd nearly died saving horses from a fire. She thought about all the reasons to say no, the gossip, the stares, the complicated feelings she wasn't ready to name. Then she thought about Emma, telling her to run when she got the chance, about choosing her own life, about a cake baked in defiance. "Yes," she said. He blinked. "Yes. Unless you've changed your mind." "No." He offered his hand, careful and formal. "Just surprised you said yes." They moved on to the floor, and Clara was immediately aware of how tall he was, how carefully he held her, maintaining proper distance even as his hand settled light on her waist. She danced with many men in her old life smooth, practiced partners who knew all the steps. Elias wasn't smooth, but he was steady, solid in a way that made her feel anchored rather than trapped. "I should warn you," he murmured. "I learned to dance from Martha. She leads." "Despite everything," Clara laughed. "That explains the careful distance. She probably threatened you within an inch of your life about proper behavior. May have mentioned something about keeping daylight between partners or losing important parts of my anatomy." They moved slowly, finding their rhythm, around them. Clara could feel the weight of watching eyes, the town cataloging every movement, every expression. But somehow, in this moment, she couldn't bring herself to care. "You know they're all staring," she said. "Let them. Doesn't it bother you what they're thinking?" Elias considered this, turning her carefully to avoid another couple. "Used to, when I was younger, angrier, wanted everyone to see I was nothing like my father. But then I realized people see what they want to see. All I can control is who I choose to be." "And who do you choose to be?" He looked down at her then, and something in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Man who's dancing with the bravest woman in Wyoming territory." "I'm not brave." You stood up to Mrs. Morrison in front of half the town. You rode into a fire for your horse. You stayed here when everyone wanted you gone. His hand tightened slightly on hers. That's brave in my book. Or foolish. Sometimes they're the same thing. The song was ending, but they kept moving, neither quite ready to step apart. Finally, the fiddle struck up a livelier tune, and the spell broke. Elias stepped back to proper distance, but his eyes held hers. Thank you for the dance. Elias Clara made a decision, quick before she could doubt it. Would you walk me home? Something flared in his eyes, surprise, hope, carefully banked heat. If you're sure. I'm not sure of anything, she admitted, but I'm tired of letting fear decide for me. They collected their coats and slipped out, leaving the bright warmth of the party for the crisp December night. The walk to Clara's cabin was quiet, their footsteps crunching in the snow. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in silver and shadow. At her door, Clara turned to face him. Can I ask you something? Always. That night, after the nightmares, you said you learned to sit still through the rattling, but you also said you were still figuring out what was worth reacting to. She took a breath. Have you figured it out with me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you're worth reacting to, Clara, worth moving for, worth changing for. But you said you weren't ready, and I meant what I said. I can wait. Will wait. Long as it takes. Clara looked at him patient. Steady Elias, who offered without taking, who gave without demanding. She thought about readiness, about fear, about the slow dance they'd been doing since she arrived in Dust Hollow. I'm not ready for promises, she said carefully. Not ready for forever or always or any of the words people say when they think they know how the story ends. All right, but maybe I'm ready to stop waiting, to see what happens if we just be no expectations, no demands, just two people choosing each other one day at a time. I can do that. Can you? Because people will talk more. Mrs. Morrison will have apoplexy. You might lose more business. Clara. He stepped closer, still not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. I already choose you. Every day when I check if you need firewood. Every time I leave apples for Sage. Every moment I spend hoping you'll smile at me like you did during that dance. The rest is just noise. She did smile then. Couldn't help it. You know I know about the apples. Course you do. You're too smart not to, but you let me do it anyway. I like the apples. Just the apples. Maybe not just the apples. They stood there in the moonlight, on the edge of something new. Not a grand romance like in the novels Clara had read in her old life. Something quieter, stronger, built on respect and patience and the radical act of choosing each other despite the world's opinions. Ask me again, Clara said softly. Ask you what? If I'm ready. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Clara Wynne, he said formally. Are you ready? No. She saw him accept that, saw him prepare to wait more, and her heart turned over. But Elias, I think maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to be ready. Maybe we just have to be willing. I'm willing. So am I. Still, he didn't touch her, didn't assume. So Clara took the last step herself, rising up on her toes to press a soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, Elias. Good night, Clara. She went inside, but watched through the window as he walked away, his step lighter than she'd ever seen it. In the distance, she could still hear music from the party, the town celebrating while she and Elias had found their own quiet celebration in the snow. Tomorrow would bring more gossip, more disapproval, more challenges. But tonight, Clara had danced with a man who saw her truly, who waited patiently, who offered partnership instead of possession. And for the first time since climbing out that window months ago, she thought maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop running and start living. Until she was. January came to Dust Hollow with a vengeance.
bringing blizzards that kept everyone indoors for days at a time. But inside Clara's cabin, the world had taken on a different quality. The curtains Martha had made hung bright against the windows. Dried herbs from her small summer garden scented the air, and on the table sat 2 cups more often than 1. A month had passed since the Christmas dance, since that moment in the moonlight when Clara had chosen willingness over readiness. True to his word, Elias demanded nothing, expected nothing, but he was there fixing a loose board in her floor, sharing quiet dinners, teaching her to read the freight ledgers so she could help with the business side of things. The town had adjusted, as towns do. The scandal of Clara Wynne and Elias Brannock had been replaced by the news that the banker's son had run off with a traveling theater troupe. Mrs. Morrison still sniffed when Clara passed, but even her disapproval had lost some of its venom. On this particular afternoon, Clara was writing a letter at her small table. The words came slowly, each one chosen with care. "Dear Catherine," she wrote to her sister back east, "I hope this letter finds you well. I know Mother has told you stories about my disgraceful behavior, and perhaps some of them are even true, but I want you to know that I am well, more than well. I am myself, for the first time in my life." A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, knowing by the rhythm who it was. Elias entered, bringing with him the scent of cold air and pine. "Mail coach is leaving in an hour if you want to send that." "Almost finished." She looked up at him, still sometimes surprised by how natural his presence felt. "Coffee, if you're offering." He settled into what had become his chair while she poured. They'd developed their own rhythms over the past weeks, comfortable silences, shared work, the careful building of something neither quite dared to name. "Let her home," he asked. "My younger sister, she deserves to know I'm all right." "Think she'll understand." Clara considered this. Maybe not now, but someday, when she's faced with her own choices, maybe she'll remember that her sister chose differently. "That's a gift, you know, showing another way is possible." She looked at him over her cup. "Is that what you did for me?" "I didn't do anything, just made space. You did the rest." Clara finished her letter, adding at the bottom, "I'm not anyone's wife, but for the first time, I am truly my own person. And Elias, the man I've written to you about, he understands this is more important than any ring could be." She sealed the letter and stood. "Walk with me to town." "Always." They bundled against the cold and set out. The path between her cabin and town was well worn now, marked by their daily passages. As they walked, Clara found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here, the terrified flight from a life that would have crushed her, the desperate days of not knowing if she'd survive. And now, this walking beside a man who made her feel safe without making her feel trapped. "Elias," she said suddenly, "do you ever think about the future?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think about the present." Very philosophical. Practical. More like, can't change the past, can't control the future. All we've got is now. He glanced at her. "Why you thinking about the future?" "I got a letter yesterday from a lawyer in St. Louis." Elias's step faltered slightly. "Oh, my grandmother died, my father's mother, left me a small inheritance." Clara kept her eyes on the snowy path. "Enough to go anywhere, start fresh somewhere new, somewhere people don't know my story." They walked in silence for several moments. Then Elias asked, very quietly, "Is that what you want, to start fresh somewhere else?" Clara stopped walking, turned to face him. "That's just it. I don't know what I want. For so long, all I wanted was to be free, to make my own choices, and now I can, and I'm scared." "Terrified?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Isn't that ridiculous? I ran away from home, survived on my own, faced down the biggest gossips in Wyoming territory, but having actual choices, that scares me more than anything." Elias studied her face,
then surprised her by smiling. "You know what I think?"
What?
"I think you already know what you want. You're just not sure you're ready to admit it."
And what do you think I want?
"Not for me to say, but Clara." He stepped closer, still maintaining that careful distance he always kept unless she closed it first. "Whatever you choose, staying, going, something else entirely, I want you to know something."
What?
"These months, having you here, seeing you find your strength, it's been the best part of my life. Whatever you decide, I'm grateful for that." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Even if I leave?" "Even then, though I'd miss you something fierce. And if I stay,
Then I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of that choice."
Elias Brannock," she said softly, "you don't have to try.
You already are.
They completed their errands in town, mailing her letter, picking up supplies. But Clara's mind was elsewhere. As they headed back, she found herself really looking at Dust Hollow. The shabby buildings that had seemed so temporary when she'd arrived. The people who'd become familiar misses. Chen with her no-nonsense kindness. Doc Henshaw with his gentle wisdom. Even prickly misses. Holloway at the boarding house. And Elias, always Elias, steady as the mountains that surrounded them. Back at her cabin, she invited him in for dinner. As she cooked a simple stew, but made with her own hands in her own home, she thought about her grandmother's money sitting in a bank in St. Louis. Freedom, if she wanted it. A new start with no questions, no history. "I don't want to leave," she said suddenly, surprising them both. Elias looked up from where he'd been tending the fire.
No.
"No?" She turned to face him fully. "I spent so long running from something, I don't want to anymore. I want to run towards something instead." "And what's that?" Clara set down her spoon, crossed the small space between them. "This, us, whatever we are or might become." She took a breath. "I'm not saying I'm ready for marriage or promises or any of that, but I'm ready to stop being afraid. Ready to choose happiness instead of just survival." "Clara, let me finish." She reached up, touched his face.
You asked me once if I was ready.
And I said no. You've asked me in different ways ever since, and the answer's always been the same. But I think I've been asking the wrong question.
What should you be asking?
Not if I'm ready, but if I'm willing to find out what happens next. If I'm willing to build something with you. Slow and careful. The way you build everything. If I'm willing to let myself be happy even if I don't know how the story ends. And yes, to all of it, yes. He covered her hand with his, turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. "Just so we're clear, you're choosing this, choosing to stay. I'm choosing you." Clara said simply, "Everything else is just details." Later, after dinner, they sat by the fire. Clara had moved her chair closer to his, their shoulders touching. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in fresh white. "I'll write to the lawyer tomorrow," she said. "Tell him to put the money in trust. Maybe someday we'll need it. For the freight business, or other things." "Other things." Clara smiled, thinking of the empty rooms in Elias's main house, of Martha's hints about grandchildren, of a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than fear. "We'll see." "I can wait," Elias said, and she knew he meant for all of it, for certainty, for promises, for whatever came next. "I know." She leaned into him, felt his arm come around her. "But maybe we've both waited long enough." They sat there as the fire burned low. Two people who'd found each other across miles and misunderstandings. Through fire and gossip and the slow building of trust. Clara thought about the woman she'd been when she'd ridden into Dust Hollow on a lame horse, frightened, desperate, sure that freedom meant being alone. Now she knew better. Freedom meant choosing your own path. Yes, but it also meant choosing who walked beside you. And as the snow fell soft outside their warm cabin,
Clara Wynne knew she'd chosen well. She wasn't ready, might never be completely ready for all that life could bring. But she was here. She was choosing. And she was finally, truly, herself. And that, she thought as Elias pressed a gentle kiss to her hair, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button so more people can discover these heartfelt stories from the Old West. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Until next time, partners.